Good afternoon, welcome to Gilligan Shepherd TV, where we cover topics of interest to business and associated parties. And today I have two guests and what we're also referring to as Bearded Lives Matter. On my left, Bruce Shepherd, who needs little or no introduction, and Damien Grant from Waterstone Insolvency, who needs slightly more introduction. Damien was once described as someone with a head full of fireworks and hands that were very reckless with matches. Damien's a well-known libertarian and is happy to share his opinions. So today our main topic of discussion is around the recent government response to lockdown and the impact on New Zealand business of the COVID-19 pandemic. Big part of that response was the wage subsidy, which has now been extended to right up to the day before the election, I believe. Both Bruce and Damien have different views as to whether it should or should not be taken by businesses. And Damien has, for example, put out actually in the paper on the weekend that if you're entitled to it, you should take it. Bruce, on the other hand, has a view that's maybe more needs-based. Only take it if you should need it. So what we'll do is we'll start by allowing each of Damien and Bruce to explain their position on the wage subsidy, give them an opportunity to rebut each other's comments, and then a few other questions, and that should take us through the end of our 30-minute time slot. So if I can start with you, Damien, if you can maybe explain your position.
We're not talking about the effectiveness of the wage subsidy, we are talking about the commercial and moral taking of it.
Correct.
Right, well, my position is pretty simple. It starts with my fundamental belief that tax is theft and that the government takes vast amounts of our money without our consent. If the government introduces a program that will allow us to recover some of that stolen money, then I'm going to do it. Part of the criticism, because it was on Breakfast TV, where I said, yes, I took the subsidy, the question was asked, did I need to take the subsidy? And the answer was no, I didn't need to take the subsidy. I qualified for it. There are a couple of criteria, and my business is qualified for it. One business didn't, the other two didn't, so we took the money. But you think about why my business was able to take the money. My business was able, why my business didn't need it, and the answer is because I run a fairly conservative balance sheet. I hold money in the bank. I don't live a particularly ostentatious lifestyle, except for the occasional annual fireworks show, which I share in large amounts of cash and literally burn in the air. So the idea is that my neighbour, who runs a far less conservative business, takes greater risks, has a very weak and broken balance sheet, and he morally apparently can take the subsidy, whereas I, with my conservative view of the world, not. I can't see the morality in that situation, and I would compare it to a GST refund. If you have a situation where you complete your GST refund and you're entitled to some money back from the GST, you may not need that money. You may have a balance sheet that does not qualify, that you don't need to pay the money, but you're entitled to the money. Why? Where is the morality that says you should not receive that cash? It makes absolutely no sense to me. So yes, we took the money. Not giving it back.
Well done, Damien. Bruce, your view, would you explain your view when faced with the opportunity for Gilligan Shepherd, one of the many businesses you're involved in, faced with the opportunity, as Damien described, entitled to take or potentially qualifying for the wage subsidy, you chose not to?
Correct. Remember, the criteria is multifaceted. The first issue is you have to believe your turnover will be down by more than 30%. Secondly, you have to have approached your bank and attempted to obtain finance to support the whole by any other means. And thirdly, you had to get the informed consent of every employee that you claimed for. Okay. So when you think about that, you say, well, have I got the means to survive this? Answer, yes, right? Because you had to examine your other resources. And Damien, you came to the view also that you had the means to survive it, so I'm not sure how you satisfied the second test, but park that. Did I think we would be down by more than 30%? At the beginning of COVID, I don't think a business in New Zealand would have thought that they weren't going to suffer to a lesser or greater degree. It would be pretty easy to form a view your suffering could tick the first box. But you really struggle to tick the second box, which is, have I approached my bank, especially when many businesses applied in the first 2 days. They did not have time to approach their bank, let alone if they've got 1,000 employees, get informed consent from them. And at the end of that, you signed a statutory declaration. Now, a statutory declaration is a declaration on oath, and I guess libertarians do care about, oaths, right? So it's a declaration, which is an oath, that if false is perjury and is criminal and you can go to jail for, right? Fine. I formed the view that I didn't think our business would be down by more than 30%, and it isn't. I decided that I did not wish to get my employees informed consent to claim a subsidy for them, simply because sending the signal that I needed the government's assistance to help pay them did not seem to me to be a signal to my employees that would make them feel comforted and secure in what is a dynamically changing situation that is unstable. I equally reflected that, as it is a matter of public record, anyone can search whether someone has claimed a wage subsidy, and when others look at it, what judgments will they make about our business and comparative businesses in the future? If you're claiming a wage subsidy, you're basically admitting that either your revenue is down, ipso facto people can assume you are failing, or that your balance sheet is so weak and frail that you can't afford to pay your bills. And if you happen to be a financial advisor of others, physician, heal thyself. It makes no commercial sense to claim it if you are in a position such as us. Different businesses don't have that issue. So one of my businesses, Argus Fire Protection, did claim the wage subsidy. In the first month, they were down 90%. Couldn't go out and service things. They clearly qualified. They didn't claim in the first week. We went to the bank. We got assistance from the bank. We examined our liquidity and formed the view that if it was as ugly as we thought it would be, in order to cover our people for 12 months, it would be a sensible and prudent thing to do. So all businesses are different. I get that. But just because you're entitled doesn't mean you should, either commercially or morally. So my view is people who have claimed it, fine. They have now just delivered the government a statutory declaration that basically says, if I can ping you on a technicality, I will. You've just invited the brown shirts of a socialist regime, which I may or may not like. I do, by the way, believe in government, Damien. I just don't believe in all flavours of government. Mm-hmm. I do believe in enlightened socialism and enlightened capitalism, but I don't believe in socialism or capitalism in extremism. But you have just delivered a signed declaration, as has everyone who claimed the wage subsidy, to a government that is intent on a redistribution, and the only way they can achieve that is through the nationalisation of business in one form or another. You're going to have potentially a bunch of brown shirts coming into your business with a statutory declaration and an invitation to jail unless you become compliant with whatever regime they want.
But that exists anyway.
Yeah, but you've just given them a hammer. Why would you give someone a hammer?
Because the state has a dozen different hammers to use at you. We are the recipient of Section 17 notices from the Inland Revenue Department, which is the ability of the Inland Revenue Department to compel us and other similar authorities to hand over information that we have. The Registrar of Companies has the right, at the Registrar's discretion, to enter the place of any business without any, they don't even need a judicial search warrant. They can just walk in. The mechanism that the state has to attack private individuals and their wealth is enormous at the moment. The reality is that, and it's an ugly truth, but our wealth, we enjoy our wealth at the fiat discretion of the state.
That has always been so.
Yes, I agree. And so given the state has 20 hammers to use against me, the fact that there's now got 21 hammers to use against me doesn't cause me any particular great concern any more than I was concerned previously. So, but you come back, I mean, you gave a whole pile of excellent answers. All of those answers were essentially around it made commercial sense for your businesses not to take the money. It wasn't necessarily we are taking an ethical or moral stance here. It's just that we're operating in this space, and it was your belief that not taking that taking that money may cause you some commercial ramifications, and fair enough too. But that wasn't a moral argument against taking it. Now you're talking about some.
I didn't get to the moral argument. I'll get to that.
Okay, all right. I'm not too sure I agree with you. There wasn't a requirement to consult with your bank. It was your requirement to take several steps, and consulting the bank is one of them. The informed consent didn't need to be in writing. So in our case, we sat there, had a staff meeting, and we actually went a bit further, and we said we wanted staff to take one day, the Friday, on leave. We guaranteed to pay them the full wage. That was voluntary. There was one staff member that didn't want to take the leave. Everybody else took Friday off, and it was leave. So we ticked all the boxes in terms of the 80%. So, but so long as you were complying with the letter of the law, and we did, then okay, great. But also remember that this wasn't what the state did, and it was utter madness. And there was actually two processes. So they had the first process. We didn't apply initially. We actually waited to see what would happen to our revenue. But in the first process was incredibly loose, and some of those requirements, frankly, weren't there. They tightened it up a little bit further down the track. But this wasn't statute. This entire thing was the government gave away $12 billion by publications they put out on a website. So, from a narrow technical legal argument, okay, let's say we have somebody who didn't tick the boxes and they didn't get the 30% of the qualifier. Okay, my argument will be, well, offer acceptance consideration. Where's the legal basis in theory for the state to claw the money back? You sign a statutory directive, you lied. Okay, there are consequences for that. But I would love to see the state running an argument to say that you have to pay the money back, because I would say, okay, what law did I break? I broke a law by signing a false false declaration, right? So somebody could certainly get pinged for that. But there's no law here. The government just said, okay, they had a $40 billion slush fund. They put some stuff up on a website and proceeded to hemorrhage $300 million a day out the door. And the vast majority of that went to businesses like mine that found it useful but did not qualify. But let's come back to the morality of this for a second. The reason why my businesses were unable to collect revenue and operate, 2 out of the 3 of them anyway, was because the state turned around and said, right, Mr. Grant, by law, we are effectively shutting your business. That's what they did. They prevented us from operating our businesses at anything like its normal capacity. Okay, I wasn't happy with that, and I disagreed with it, and I thought it was appalling and utterly mad. But I complied with that. Right? We followed the lockdown rules, even though I thought they were madness. Then the state turned around and says, okay, we are imposing upon you an enormous economic cost. At the same time, we are going to give you compensation for that. Now, it's madness because we're basically all compensating ourselves, so it's ridiculous. But you're talking about the morality of it. That would be my pushback, is that I did not want to close my business. I had no desire to. I would not have done so had the state not required me. The state did require me to do so, and I complied. And the state turned around and says, right, there's compensation for the damage that we have done.
Bruce, on the morality?
So my answer to that is I tend to look beyond my business to the broader community in which I live.
Yes.
I take the view that we either sink together or we succeed together, broadly. I would prefer not to sink. In order for me not to sink, I say each according to their means. Very socialistic, perhaps.
Well, that's not socialistic.
No, this is
one step further beyond socialism. If you repeat the next sentence that comes along with that,
which I won't. So, I take the view that among our client base, there are businesses that are hurting and are less capable of surviving it than I, that do not deserve to fail and have to endure or enjoy the services of businesses like yours.
Mm-hmm.
Damien runs an insolvency practice. And my view was my long-term ability to succeed and thrive in a community was by helping others to succeed and thrive, and me taking $1 out of the pot is $1 less for someone else. Irrational as it transpired, because all of the things you have said, I disagreed with. Disagreed with lockdown, disagreed with all of that except closing the borders and compulsory quarantine. That's the only rational response. Disagreed with subsidising people, because if you hadn't closed them down, you wouldn't be subsidising them. Closing the borders would have created an issue for tourism. You could deal with that on a situational basis. Disagreed with it all. My simple decision for me was, there are other people that need this more than me. I will stand back, because I do not want to take money off the table for others that will succeed and survive if they get it, thus creating fee revenue and business for me in the future. And secondly, the pile of debt that this government has accumulated is not something I wish to add to. My children and grandchildren will be paying for this for a lifetime. If I can save them half a nanosecond of it at any point, I think I should. It's irrational, but it's a moral view. Morality is very rarely rational.
All right, so let me drill down on that. So my perspective is, to whom do I owe a moral obligation, and in what order do I owe that? Where does that moral obligation lie? And in my perspective, myself and my family is where my primary moral obligation sits. In my situation, my staff and my suppliers, well, my staff first, and then the suppliers to a smaller extent.
We are agreeing entirely.
And then, so from my perspective, operating in that with that hierarchy of where my morality, my obligations, my ethical obligations sit to, that's where they sit to. So I'm going to act in the interest. Now, the two businesses, one I'm the sole shareholder, one I'm a minority shareholder, so there's the interest of the other minority shareholders as well. But that's where in my view, I will act in the best interest of my family and my staff. And so we have the issues of the wider community. I'll take that into account, but in the way I view the world, they are less important in terms of where I place the decisions I make in terms of my priority of ethical obligations. I'll place the priority of my family and my staff first. But then we come back to the other issue of who's going to be paying for it. Now, the reality is that people like you, me and Michael are going to be the ones, at least for the years that we're still kicking around above ground, we are going to be the ones that are going to be paying for this, and we are going to be paying for it hard and long. And let's not forget the possibility that this has to be paid for in a number of ways. First, increased taxation to settle the debt. Second, a significant reduction in government services going forward. The other third possibility is inflation, which is eroding the value of our capital stock. So you have a situation where the government is taking steps that creates enormous economic uncertainty into the years ahead. And the very nature of some of my businesses is I don't know. I mean, I've got the other issue where the government is potentially creating all sorts of problems in my business as well. So, taking that into account is, well, okay, given the uncertainty of the economic environment that I'm sitting in, the state is offering me compensation for the actions that they have taken. I see no ethical problem.
I get your point. If you take an infinite view of life, and by the way, we have a finite view because we have finite time, but your children and your grandchildren, etc. Your family could go on forever.
Yes.
You made a point earlier that the Crown has multiple hammers to beat the shit out of this with.
They do.
I'm disinclined to give them another. Right?
Yes.
I am happy to deal with the hammers they have, but I would prefer to encourage them to find other people to beat with them other than me. Right? Thus, if you take the view that living in a community and supporting it encourages others to say, that's a good one, put the pitchfork through that bastard, is a hell of a lot better way to ensure that my children and grandchildren survive than being rapaciously gathering in resources to live in a fortified castle. Okay? If you take the view that everything we have is granted to us by government, which it is, our freehold land titles are granted to us by government. Every
It's
license...
a philosophical argument that we could spend another hour on.
We could.
I would disagree with that assessment, but go on.
Yep. If we take that view, we live and enjoy life at the behest of others, as do our children.
That's true, yes.
Therefore, if you sit back and put the selfish view on the moral stance, my moral stance is taken because I believe it gives my team here and my family a better chance of long-term survival by taking the moralistic view that currently is vogue and will be for a while of we need to care about each other and we will get through this together. Playing against that song sheet puts you on the outer, and if the world gets really ugly, means your gut's got a likely bigger target on it for a pitchfork and let them eat cake, French revolutions, than perhaps my family have.
Well, if they put the pitchfork through me, Bruce, then they can do that. Looking at those same set of facts, I disagree, and for two reasons. One, I think my assessment of how the Crown's going to react to this thing, given the chaotic and shambolic and ad hoc nature to which it was done, I think the likelihood of the state getting hammers to beat people up with it is very small. It's simply because they did not think about this process particularly well. So I don't actually think they've got a hammer. I don't think it's a chocolate hammer that's been out in the sun, frankly. So I'm not overly.
I like chocolate. I should have perhaps.
Yeah, I've used a chocolate hammer analogy before it gets me into trouble. But the other thing which I don't like, and maybe it comes out of my contrarian nature, is there is a degree of let's just go along with the herd and all this, let's be kind and everything. I don't like it. I don't think it's true. I don't think it's correct. I think it is sophistry. I think it is hypocrisy. And you saw that in the first tranche, because initially the database wasn't searchable. And all the great and the good got their snout so far deep in that trough, and they were gouging deep in the trough. And then I think it was Grant Robertson turns, we'll make it transparent. And at that stage I hadn't taken it. And the great and the good, you could hear the sucking up, and oh my goodness, well, and they all handed back the money. Well, what we know
they're actually the worst.
So what we know about those great and the good is that they are greedy, avarice, and hypocritical. Paying the money back does not, we now know that about them. We know what you are now, madam. We're only negotiating the price. And so here they were falling over themselves in abasement to try to prove that they were not the selfish, greedy, avarice, narcissistic sociopaths that they truly are. Okay, I think at that point, once your soul has been revealed, you may as well just own it. And
correct. I agree with you. So the big law firms and the big accounting firms that claimed it and handed it back should stop talking, because everyone will think, madam, thou do protest too much.
Exactly.
If you are what you are, don't be fake.
Yes.
Which is why you and I are having this discussion and why you're on Gilligan Shepherd TV, because, Damien, you're not fake.
Very kind of you to say, I am a truly narcissistic, horrible sociopath, and you're prepared to own that about yourself. Well done. Well done. Right.
But here is the irony, Jimmy. I mean, Damien, if you really were truly selfish and focused, you'd be telling people, don't take it. Because if they don't take it, they're more likely to tip into insolvency, which is great for Waterstone. Bruce, on the other hand, what's great for Gilligan Shepherd is if all of our clients started taking it, it gives them more fees, it allows them to carry on longer before they go from the hatched to the dispatched. But if I can, just to wrap this up, I mean, you're both almost arguing the same point at time, but
one point we can agree on, though, Damien, it is the top 1% that will be paying for it. And as I said to one of my whining clients who said, this is the best thing since sliced bread, we shouldn't be piling the coffins up. And I said, let them die. He said, you can't do that. You can't let them die. It would be a mess. And I've said, each life we're saving is costing us the best part of a sum, which is greater than the net present value of their future benefit. Pure economics. And
hold on, so I'm not so sure I follow. You're talking about the people who may die from the disease.
Yes, so I'm saying the amount we're spending to save people is more than their economic value. Fine, that's yes. A very callous argument.
Yes.
And the debt that the top 1% has inherited will come straight out of their investable capital to create jobs that are meaningful and growth and opportunity in New Zealand. I would prefer to pile the coffins up and create jobs.
That's
it. Yeah. I can't guide what's happening. All I can do is act according to my heart and endeavour to have enough survival bandwidth to not care too much about it.
There's a question for you both. A mousetrap only works because the mouse thinks the cheese is free. The wage subsidy, I think it'd be fair if I could assume from what you both said, hasn't really worked in terms of efficacy. Maybe.
No, it hasn't worked. It's been scattered widely, and I call it, we have a tooth fairy, Jacinda, who is sprinkling tooth fairy dust. And it is completely random. It is completely gameable. She said this is a regime based on trust, right? And to your point, most humans are untrustworthy, and the untrustworthy partook, and the needy got it, and the unneedy got it. It was completely random. It was an utter loss.
What would you do differently?
Imagine a scenario where the state simply turned around and says, okay, if you lose your job $1,000 a week, that's it. You know, incredibly simple.
That's what they should have done.
That's what they should have done. If you lose your job $1,000 a week, no questions asked back, right? And then if you're a business, you can lay people off in good conscience because you know they're going to get $1,000 a week. So businesses that have the ability to survive and fall back on their capital base, they would have been rewarded. So conservative businesses with good balance sheets would have survived. Reckless businesses without good balance sheets who couldn't, okay, they're gone. Human suffering would have been alleviated because the $1,000 a week would.
We agree. By far the better outcome.
And they would have spent probably $1 billion.
And the worst part of this is that the frail that should fail have been insulated. And the fundamental process of capitalism is the destruction of the weak to enable the strong to thrive, right? Yes. That is the fundamental. This billions of dollars of capital thrown into the economy has effectively incented and enabled the frail to continue competing and thus weakening the whole. There are so many bad outcomes from this that we could go on forever, right? The issue is, did some claim it, yes or no? Should they do it based on entitlement? Your view is it's negative taxes, why wouldn't you? My view is we probably weren't entitled, but even if we were, the commercial signalling is not sensible. Mm-hmm. And secondly, if we have the means to survive, let others have it is a moral decision that everyone has a framework for that they make on their own.
It actually contradicts what you were talking about Shinta's creative destruction a minute ago. Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of dissidents in your own argument.
You have already known that I have conflicts in my arguments. We've had these before, Dave.
Right, fair enough.
But if I'd claimed it,
Yes.
it would have been, in the relative scheme of things for our business, chump change.
Yes.
In the relative scheme of things for my net worth, chump change.
Mm-hmm.
It would not have moved the dial either way.
Well, that is not true of my financial situation.
So I simply said the signalling of not claiming commercially is smarter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not entitled anyway, but even if I were, the whole regime is so chaotic, so stupid, so mind-numbingly misguided that I am not going to validate it by playing in its sandpit.
Well, my financial situation is not that. So whilst I could have survived without it, the economic cost to me of not taking it was material. It was a big dollar value relative to my business and my net worth. So for me, the virtue signalling would have been much more expensive, and also given my contrarian public nature, it was almost in my interest to take it and be public about it.
And at least it's consistent.
It's consistent, yes. Consistency matters.
So Damien, at the end of this, do we understand each other's position?
I understand that you're wrong, yes, and I understand why you're wrong. So that's great.
And Bruce, it's something you won't be used to. I will give you the last word. Gentlemen, thank you very much. This is, as always, entertaining. To share these discussions. When this goes up on live, there will be contact details for both, obviously yourself, Damien,
yes,
and obviously Gilligan Shepherd, and we will hopefully regroup at another stage to talk about what has and hasn't worked in our economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. God, it'll be an endless round of that.